Great. Well, it is noon and I wanted to get us started on time. So welcome to Habitat for Humanity's Cost of Home conversation with council members Hans Zeiger and Ryan Mello. This event today is brought to you by our friends at HomeStreet Bank, a bank that's committed to affordable housing in our communities. And we want to thank them for giving us opportunity to bring together a fun but wonky conversation about some recent action that the Pierce County Council took to really invest in our communities and invest in affordable housing and home and shelter and services for our homeless members of our community. So want to welcome council members Zeiger and Mello. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Good to see you, Jason.
Thank you, Jason.
And I will note that that both of you, you just got done with your first year on the county council, correct? So
Right.
Shot out of a cannon, not a question I prepared you for, but what was the best thing about your first year on the county council?
I'd say, getting to be one of seven on a county council. You're involved with virtually every decision that comes through the council, which is different than my background in the state legislature in one respect, where when you're one of 147, you have to have a division of labor, and the committee system is designed to do that in the state legislature. But at the county level, everybody's involved with every policy decision, and it's very collaborative. And I was very pleased with the level of collaboration that we have here on the Pierce County Council.
That's great. It's I heard you say you're a lot more special now being one of seven than one of almost 150.
That's right.
Those are my words. And Councilmember Mello, best thing about your first year on council?
Through most of the, Hans and I actually share a wall. So he's at his home office at the moment. It looks like because I live 5 blocks away, I'm at the county. So I usually knock on the wall whenever I want to talk to him. So it's been fun having Hans as a neighbor here, and collaborating with him on a whole bunch of things, especially housing and homelessness. I definitely concur on the collaborative nature of some of these major priorities. And I think the other thing is, Hans coming from a state background, I know I've heard him talk numerous times about how much more fun it is to work a lot more practically and less esoterically. And also, the difference for me coming from the city to the county, the level of staffing for the county council, I think we're just able to do our job, I think, so much more effectively. The staff here at the county council and who serve all the departments, the staff at the city are fantastic. They really are. It's a different form of government, a different level of engagement and service, with the ability to do this work full time and give my full-time attention to the policymaking work is different than the city, and having being able to just really focus on it is, I think, just a bit more refreshing.
That's great. Well, I'm glad you both enjoyed as much as you can enjoy that first year on council, and look forward to continuing to work with you. So I want to jump into our conversation today, and our conversation was about your investments and the council's investments in affordable housing and homelessness. And so the big headline that I kept seeing on social media from the council members' accounts and the county was, $200 million for housing and homelessness. So I've got to ask, what did you actually invest in?
Yeah, so there's a lot to be really excited about with these investments. Actually, when we have been promoting the $200 million number, so thanks for paying attention, Jason. Actually, when you put all of the staffing that it takes to support all of it, it's actually closer to 250 million. We haven't promoted that as much. So it's a big part of our overall $3 billion budget to run county government, and very for good reason. Here's some specifics about the $200 million, how it breaks down. Excited to have this conversation, but just some of the highlights. We were able to plus up some of the investment we make to housing providers like Habitat, Tacoma Housing Authority, other private and nonprofit affordable housing developers. We were able to, every year we make a pretty modest grant round for folks to actually build affordable housing. We were able to plus that up this next year and go farther down the contingency list of project proposals. So we're going to get about 5 to 10 units of housing actually built here because of what we were able to invest in directly there. That'll be built here in the next, year, 18 months. And then we set aside money for the next 2 grant rounds, 2022, 2023, to be able to plus up the amount of money we're able to offer in that grant round than historically. So that's something really specific to highlight. We set aside another $5 million to do an additional hotel or motel acquisition similar to the Comfort Inn purchase in South Tacoma. So somewhere else in the county, maybe in the Fife area, Greater Tacoma, Fife, I-5 corridor area, likely, to bring another motel online. So the Aspen Court, now called Aspen Court, the old Comfort Inn, that's going to be serving a little over 100 people and families here as they keep onboarding more families. So another one of those is set aside. And one other thing I'll just highlight of that $200 million is we also are investing $5.5 million to the Tacoma Rescue Mission, right? One of the main emergency shelters in our region. So this $5.5 million is going to get put right to work. They have the designs and engineering done to build a whole new wing of the shelter on South Tacoma Way. So it's going to be able to house about another 115 people experiencing homelessness. It's got to get built, but it's ready to go. So those are just a couple of things that I would highlight of the $200 million investment.
Great.
And I would say Ryan summarized those well. I would just add that, we've just completed, or I should say our county's Human Services Department, working with a number of people, community leaders and people who are concerned about the issue of homelessness throughout the community, just completed the county's comprehensive plan to end homelessness and submitted that to the county council. And so many of the investments, all of the investments that Ryan just described, align well, I believe, with the plan that we received. And I'll just say, I've never seen the kind of collaboration and leadership that we're seeing now around homelessness. And part of that's a reaction to the very real and present issue that is in front of us. But county and city governments, business leaders, philanthropists, nonprofits, and other stakeholders are coming to get to the table to find solutions. So I'm very encouraged by that. I think it helps that we've had access to resources through the American Rescue Plan, through state funding that we haven't had in the past. So the access to that funding, the planning process that's been underway in the county has led to some conversations that haven't happened at this level in the past. So I'm very encouraged by that.
That's terrific. And I'm gonna dive into a few specific questions around in this sort of the $200 million sort of bucket, right? And you mentioned, Councilmember Zeiger, sort of community collaboration, philanthropists, service organizations, community members. And I know in my world, there was a lot of support that I saw, letters going around of support for something that the county funded. So there was an investment of about $23 million made into what I will call a concept based on a model from Austin, Texas, called Communities First Village. The model, from what I understand, and hopefully you can correct me if I'm getting any of this wrong, the model implements a number of different housing options, sort of tiny homes, RVs, a few other options I would assume, to provide safe and independent shelter for our homeless community members. Can you sort of tell us more about why the council invested in this, right? And what you're hoping to see come to fruition with this model?
You bet. A number of Pierce County community leaders have gone down to Austin to see what they're doing there and have come away convinced that this would be the right thing to do here in Pierce County. So in the budget that was passed by the council, we committed $22.3 million toward a community first village, and that would, I think, go a long way to not just providing housing, but also a dignified community for people who are coming out of homelessness. And this is, we're talking about permanent housing, for people who need those long-term or permanent supports. And so the model out of Austin, Texas, it's home to hundreds of formerly homeless men and women, and they've been very successful. They've engaged the community in a dramatic and very inspiring way. They're scaling it up to, they have plans to scale it up to 1,900 RVs and tiny homes. And it includes on-site medical, job opportunities, mental health and recovery resources. And they have a 3-part covenant that residents have to follow. So they say that you've got to pay rent from whatever income that you have on time. You have to abide by the civil laws, and you have to follow the community's adopted rules. So similar to a neighborhood HOA. And they've been very successful in this model. They have some staff and volunteers who live on site, and the support from the private sector and individuals there has been just tremendous. So I'm very excited about the prospect for this. I think it has the prospect to enlist a number of people from different sectors in our community to get on board and support it. And so the search is now on for a suitable property, and the goal is to identify that by the end of 2022. The goal is to identify a provider by the summer.
So plans are underway. That's great.
Correct.
And so I'm gonna ask sort of 2 follow-up questions to this one, and they sort of intertwine as well, I could imagine. And so you mentioned there is looking for a provider by the summer, looking for property to begin the development of for this by the end of the year. I guess just on the property side of things, does the county have any? I guess sort of where generally is the county hoping to site something like this, and are there any sort of any irons on the fire on this one, right? Do you have any sort of, are there any properties you're looking at right now? And then I do want to ask as well, as a part of that, because I think the community could help here, but I see a lot on social media, especially of community members that are interested in assisting our homeless community members and sort of with the model Community First Village. Is there any way that once set up or prior to setup too, that community members can engage and assist and volunteer? Or
Well, I'm sure that our county human services director, Heather Moss, who's very much she's involved in the details of all of this, would welcome contact from anybody on this who has ideas or interest in this. I would say at this point, spread the word. I think this is something that our community can really get excited about. In my experience, as homelessness has been a challenge for our community, it's something that a lot of people talk about. And I've seen so many different convenings over the years, particularly in Puyallup, which is where I'm most familiar with efforts to address homelessness. And I've long been a believer, you need a proposal on the table. And here's a proposal, here's something we can rally behind. So I'm very encouraged by that. And I would say spread the word at this point. And then there will be, once a provider is identified, certainly there will be opportunities to get more involved at that point.
Well, thanks and that's great. I was wondering, that's great to say spread the word. I've seen that sort of floating around as well. Like we're looking to identify sites. Please let us know what might be out there. Councilmember Mello, there was a $9 million allocation to implement the comprehensive plan to end homelessness. I am not an expert on homelessness or the comprehensive plan to end it, but can you sort of describe, or in generally, or as much detail as you want to go into? I know you're a policy wonk guy, but what that plan entails, and then as well, $9 million seems like a lot of money, but doesn't seem like a lot of money as well. So is the county sort of positioned funding wise within that plan to sort of fund the plan to end homelessness?
Yeah, so Hans mentioned this work that we directed the County Human Services Department to put together a comprehensive plan to end homelessness, with an initial real focus on street homelessness. And so, an 18-member steering committee was put together. So practitioners in the space, the homelessness services space, and professional staff from our Human Services Department went right to work. And they worked hard throughout 2021 to deliver the draft plan to us, as Hans mentioned at the end of the year. The council will be taking up the plan maybe as soon as February. We got the introduction to the final draft plan. It's incredibly well thought through and robust. There's accountability measures that are built in for every one of the goals and strategy areas of the plan, which I think is great. I would really encourage folks, who are listening in. I know we all of us are taking the time to have this lunchtime conversation, just really care deeply about this topic. So I really encourage folks to Google comprehensive plan to end homelessness and read it. It's a good read. It happens to be at the top of my desk. My camera's blurred, but you can get the digital copy just by Googling. There's 6 goals in the plan that range everything from improving the data that we have so that we can better understand why people find themselves homeless, why people are not accessing services, making sure that the programs we deliver are culturally competent so that people actually feel comfortable accessing the services, to expanding permanent housing. So there's 6 clear goals in this plan, really clear strategies. Again, the thing that I want to emphasize is there's accountability measures for each of the goal areas, which I think is a really smart move. And there's a lot of detail there, along with dollar amounts, as you mentioned, Jason. So, of our budget, we did set aside dollars that we could, we have readily accessible to us. And so after we made disbursements of all kinds, some of them we've already begun talking about, we said to ourselves as a council, hey, a lot of folks did a lot of really important work with this comprehensive plan to end homelessness. So let's set aside some resources in addition to all these different things, right? Another hotel, more money for grant programs to build housing. So in addition to the specific things we appropriated funds to, we said, let's set aside $9 million, which is what we could find in our budget. Let's set aside $9 million for some really specific items we want to invest in after the council really is able to finalize the plan to end homelessness and say, okay, we want to move forward on these additional things with this $9 million. It's not going to fund everything, but it's the dollars that we have readily accessible to us that we wanted to set aside for this really important purpose.
Great. And then I'll ask, because you mentioned, and Councilmember Zeiger, please jump in as well. I know your experience at the state legislature probably gives you some insight what I'm going to ask in a moment. When it comes to you mentioned, Councilmember Mello, like it's gonna take more money, right? Like that's just, we got to serve people, we got to build housing, and different variations of that housing. It costs money to do things, right? That's the way the world is. And so I guess my question is, where does that money come from, right? Are there avenues right now that are available outside of the normal budget process that you all are looking at and your departments are looking at? And then what are ways in which this council and this county we'll begin to look creatively at, whether it's our federal partners or our state partners, to sort of ensure that we have the resources to make this plan not a reality, but sort of actionable and doable in the end.
So there's we need, just to be frank, we need a lot more resources in order to fund the plan. But that we told the folks developing the comprehensive plan in homelessness to not put any political overlays on the plan, right? Be straight with us. Be clear about what it's going to take. It's not your job to do anything but tell us what are the right strategies and how much is this going to cost. And the council will have the tough job of trying to figure out how to resource it, but don't bring any of those barriers to play when you're telling us the real truth. So when you look at the needs, right, the plan shows that just on capital aside, just building stuff and spaces for people, we need an additional minimum of approximately $15 million for emergency shelter at a minimum. We need about $400 million for permanent supportive housing. So folks who will be chronically homeless, who will always need permanent supports in their life. We need about $400 million just for capital. We're really, really deficient in Pierce County in permanent supportive housing. And then we all know that there's a huge need for general affordable housing, right? Folks who have not found themselves homeless yet, but are paying way too much for their housing, right? They're paying more than 30% of their income for housing. We have a dearth of just available units in the private sector, in the public marketplace, and that number is not exactly known yet. We have another process we're going through to understand what is the true need in dollars and units for the amount of just affordable housing in the private space. So that's just the capital. And then there's the programmatic needs to manage and operate all of this, which is probably about another $40 or so million needed. So that's kind of the scale that we're operating in. And yeah, it's going to take all of us. It's going to take pooling together local city revenues, more state revenues, federal revenues, and private philanthropic dollars. And I think we need to look at new revenue sources.
Councilmember Zeiger.
Well, in the numbers, Ryan mentioned some of the dollar figures there that we're seeing in that comprehensive plan. The numbers of unsheltered homeless, I think it's important for everybody to know those numbers. It's 3,300 in Pierce County, and the current shelter bed capacity is about 1,000, and so it gives you a sense of what the unmet need is there. Now, if you do something in one part of the homelessness response system, you can make a difference in other parts. So, for example, as we move forward on this community first village, which is permanent supportive housing for people, I would imagine most of whom have experienced long-term homelessness, chronic homelessness, we can alleviate some of that shelter capacity because some long-term homeless individuals are in the shelter system to meet a long-term need. And so we can open up some of those beds by investing in permanent supportive housing. But we need to make progress. And as we make progress, I think that momentum will be significant. It is something that everybody in our community, every sector needs to be involved with. And, as I look at who's been involved in this, I think there are some players out there in Pierce County who've been somewhat on the sidelines. I think the business community can step up and get more involved. I think the philanthropic community has more capacity to get involved. We're making significant investments that we've never made before from the county government level. The state is certainly doing more than it has in the past. There's talk at the state legislative level about a package to deal with our homelessness crisis coming out of this session. And I want to make sure we can shape that in a way that works best for Pierce County. But I think that's the kind of thing we're going to need to make an ongoing financial commitment to addressing this issue. No question about that.
And I know I was saving this a little ways down the end of our questions, but since you brought it up, I'm going to rise it to the top now. And as well, Councilmember Zeiger, for the audience, we've worked together for years in Olympia. And I know you're not in Olympia anymore, and you're not a state legislator, but I'm going to ask you about Olympia now. So you mentioned I saw the governor rolled out, and obviously the governor's package is the governor's package. We'll see what the legislature does with it, or they don't do anything with it. But the governor rolled out a package a couple of weeks ago. I think the big number was $800 million for housing and homelessness. And you mentioned working with, the state delegation from the Pierce County Council level on shaping that package so that it works for Pierce County. What does that look like in your mind? What are you hoping to shape to make it work for Pierce County? I
would say just don't put too many, restrictions on how local governments use dollars that come down to them. Because what Pierce County is going to do in this area may be different than what a rural county does, may be different from what King County does. And so, and the map of different organizations that are involved in this space, which is inspiring when you look at all of the different groups that are coming to try to provide solutions. it's different here than it is in any other county. So allow those dollars to be as flexible as possible. And I would say I am a fan of local governments taking action as much as possible. We can get into the affordable housing side of this question as the legislature makes investments in affordable housing, as well as policy decisions about affordable housing. But I'd say let local people determine their own destiny as much as possible. And I'm confident that we have the capacity here in Pierce County to step up and do that well. So both on the homelessness and the affordable housing front, as there's policies being made and budget decisions being made this legislative session, I'd say get as much money to the local governments as possible, keep that as flexible as possible, and keep the policy as flexible as possible. But certainly incentives and options. We need more incentives and options when it comes up to the affordable housing picture as well.
And I am going to circle back on that incentive question as well, because
I figured you would.
yeah, Councilmember Mello, and I don't want to leave you out of the state sort of the state discussion as well. I think most folks in local government say, yeah, like keep it flexible. Let us decide locally how we can use these dollars. Anything to sort of add in that general direction of here's how we'd like to shape that package?
Yeah, some specific things that I think we're going to be advocating for is some dollars, especially to do some acquisition of land for affordable housing projects, especially acquisition of land around our light rail corridor, both the Central Link corridor and Tacoma Link, and the bus rapid transit corridor, right? It's going to go from downtown Tacoma through South Tacoma and into Parkland and Spanaway. These are places where we're making major public investments on transportation infrastructure. And we know that if we don't do anything, folks are going to get displaced from being able to live close to these transportation options so that they can get to school and work. So making sure that we reserve the land before it gets way too expensive, making sure we reserve the land for a little while to give time to entities like Habitat and Tacoma Housing Authority and other developers willing to develop affordable housing projects along these transportation corridors is going to be really, I think, important. So I want to make sure some of the dollars that come from the state are used specifically for that purpose. I think it would be a shame if, we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on these major transportation projects, and to make sure that only wealthy people can live along them would just not be just. So we have a lot of opportunity there. And I think we also have opportunity to, Hans and I work on reforms to the Growth Management Act over the years. And I think that there's opportunity to continue to do that together. There's opportunity to make developers have to go through what's called the State Environmental Policy Act checklist when they're developing an apartment building project. And I'm of the mind that, in places in cities that we've already said, yes, we want growth to happen there. It's already planned for growth. There's sewer capacity. The roads are pretty good. There's buses that come, these kinds of things where it's pretty straightforward and we plan for it, that there should be a more streamlined way to get that apartment building built in that appropriate area and not tack on time unnecessarily to building that project. Time is money, right, in development. And if we can lessen those kinds of barriers where it makes sense, there's no wetland there, there's no river close by, the infrastructure exists, we should be able to streamline the development process better, because again, time is money in development, and that all adds up.
You went the policy route, Councilmember Mello. I sort of said we're going to come back to that. So,
sorry.
I'm really glad that you're sort of letting your nerd flag fly a little bit here. So you mentioned sort of streamlining development and sort of removing some barriers, right, from the state level for developing housing and affordable housing. There was a note that I saw. I think it was Chair Young, the county council, after the budget passed. he mentioned some things in some questions from, I think it was the News Tribune, about affordable housing, and talked a little bit about county surplus land. The county doesn't own an amazing amount of surplus property, but they do own some property. The most high profile, I think, is right there on Tacoma Avenue, not far from the city county building. And so Chair Young seemed to sort of indicate an interest or a willingness or a desire even to begin to really think about, we need to build housing. We need to move fast. We have surplus property. We need to use that for housing, affordable housing, or different versions of it. So I guess here's my general question to you both. When it comes to surplus property inside the county, right? Whether that's county-owned property, we begin looking at school districts, or other forms of junior taxing districts. How does the county want to look at utilizing a surplus property for affordable housing development?
Well, I'll say, 2 years ago, there was a study by, or 3 years ago, Burt Consulting. And one of the recommendations out of that was to look at county-owned surplus property for affordable housing. And there's a follow-up study now underway, also Burt Consulting is doing, and I expect that's going to lead to some good conversation on the county council this year about what does the picture look like of county-owned surplus property, and what would the policy response be. And so I'm hoping for some solid recommendations that can come out of that report that would be actionable by the county council. And certainly, as you say, Chair Young has been leading the conversation about that Tacoma Avenue property and getting people thinking about that as well. So more to come on all of that.
I think this is something that we can help provide some regional convening leadership of all the cities as well. Not only does the county have property it no longer has a need for, but so do all of our city partners, right? Over time, government collects property that they don't need anymore. So I think we can provide some regional convening leadership, and we have some tables set to have those conversations, I think, well, here in the coming year. And one of the really practical things we can do is just be really clear about where that property is. We have work to do too. You would think it would be easier to be able to look at a map and say, okay, here's the collection of all of the property that respective governments say they don't have a utility for any longer. And then I think, as Hans said, we have work to do to improve our policies to say, for this subset of properties, we think affordable housing should be its primary use, and let's see what partners in the nonprofit and private market want to work with us to achieve that vision. So we have a lot of data work to do. We then have some cleanup on our policy work to do. And recently the legislature made some improvements to say that local governments can actually gift or highly reduce the transfer of land to a private or nonprofit developer for the purpose of affordable housing. Before, right, local government had to sell that land at fair market value, which just was, another cost, right, to the pro forma of building housing. So if we can come to the table with land and say what we want in return is 100 units of perpetual affordable housing, and gain a partner to build that's great to me. And so there was a barrier removed at the state level where we no longer have to sell that. We can put that on the table as our part of the equation to get more housing online.
Terrific. And sort of readjusting us for a second here, but still on the housing development spectrum. One of the things that I've really appreciated about working with both of you individually and your colleagues on the council over the last year and in this budget process was, really being sort of asked as the affordable housing community, what do you need, right? We've got an unprecedented amount of money to make some investments here to speed along projects. Councilmember Mello, you mentioned sort of your opening about, sort of investments you made in spurring on an additional 5 or 6 affordable housing projects this year, and an additional $12 million investment for future years for sort of the competitive grant cycle, which $20 million, $20 million over really 2 years. You're plussing up a pool by about 200%. So a huge investment there. But I guess one of the things that I think about a lot in the affordable housing world is, we don't talk enough about with local government. Here is what we need you to do to make this project happen, right? But even Habitat, I'll use it as an example. We have a pipeline of property that we look at 5-6 years out, right? And the question that I feel like you all, right, or local government should be asking more is, how can we cut that timeline in half? Is it possible to cut that timeline in half? So let me ask you both, how can affordable housing developers in the county work better together to do that, right? How can we get more affordable housing developers sort of to work on cutting that, that 4-year development timeline down to 3 years, right? How can we build more capacity in the affordable housing development world to speed up the development of construction and the critically needed, affordable housing and shelter that we need?
I think what we've learned a lot by listening to folks who actually do this work in the real world. One of the things is what you mentioned is project management capacity. It takes project managers at these development firms to work up projects, to put together the financing, to do the site selection, and the myriad of tasks it takes to actually build a housing project. So I think we need to invest in that capacity. We often want to invest in the sexy thing that actually cuts the ribbon or puts the shovel in the ground, which definitely needs our investment. But I think local government needs to be reminded that it takes humans to make all the magic happen, and that is a limiting capacity to make the magic happen. So we got to invest in the front end on that. And I think we have to acknowledge that every step in the process is time. So, right, if we can, like we were talking about before about surplus land, if we can get land in the hands of affordable housing developers quicker, cheaper, that shaves off months off of the timeline. Right? If we can make financing happen, instead of you having to fill out 3 or 4 different financing applications and beat your head against the wall to get tax credits from the federal government, right? If we can shave off months from the financing part of the timeline to make it easier, quicker to get access to that financing, that shaves off time for this. So those are some specific examples that we've heard that I think we can really get at.
I appreciate those points, Ryan. I think this question about how do you make it easier to do affordable housing is closely related to the question of how do you increase overall housing supply. We know that we need to address the missing middle question in our real estate market, where we're 225,000 units at least short of where we should be statewide. We have a lot of catching up to do. And so how can we make our permitting processes go more smoothly for the demand that's out there? We know that there is demand to build new housing. We know that there's a backlog right now. We funded some new development engineering positions in our county budget, but it's been challenging to fill those positions and to meet up the demand that's out there. So we need to deal with that in the short term. That's a very immediate thing in front of us. When it comes to density policies and other kinds of housing policies that I think we can make to address this overall housing supply shortage that we have, we need to be proactive about that at the local level. Over the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen legislation at the state level to mandate zoning and housing policy decisions. And I think that's partly because of a perception, or largely because of a perception, that local governments aren't doing what is needed in the face of our housing shortage. And I would argue that we need to step up and do that work here locally. And I'm encouraged by the efforts that are underway with the South Sound Housing Affordability Partners, and appreciate Ryan's representation of the council on that, because it is, I think, making a real difference in making sure that all of our local governments get on the same page about the crisis we're facing with housing overall and affordable housing in particular, to start to figure out how can we make housing more affordable and more attainable for people at all income levels. It's been a really useful forum thus far to get leaders together throughout Pierce County. It's been good to see how cities are buying in to put some skin in the game just recently, to commit to this for the long haul. So I think that SHAPE effort has just been really important and will continue to be important.
You mentioned something there about local municipalities, local communities taking action on, I guess we'll broadly say, the density issue, right? We just saw Tacoma pass Home in Tacoma, its land use vision moving forward. I know Puyallup is working on its housing action plan. But you mentioned that one of the things I hear from municipalities, and I'm sure you both do as well, is we're doing a lot of these things that the state legislature is talking about mandating. What we need is more money to sort of to do this stuff, right? Working with other municipalities, there's not a whole lot of planners, long range planners in the planning department in Bonnie Lake, right? To really dive into that sort of long range, housing growth vision. So I guess the two questions there: how can the county government support those municipalities in doing that? I heard you mention SHAPE, which I'm gonna probably ask Councilmember Mello, because you sit on that governing body, more about how that can support that. But how can county government and how can state government potentially better support those sort of density policies at the local level?
I think you mentioned it, Jason, and so did Hans, the need for those planners to work with local communities. There's a lot of work to do to bring communities along, right, about what growth is going to mean for their community. And I think a lot of folks are accepting of growth when they can visualize it and when it comes with the kinds of amenities that they deserve, right? People don't want to live in a terrible community. If it comes with with sidewalks and street trees and roads that aren't totally clogged and a bus that can run at a decent time frame and schools for their kids, it's growth gone bad that people rightfully react to. And so back to the question about planners, like, this is what planners do for local jurisdictions, right? Bring communities along, help them talk through the issues, and it just help dream about what's right. Is it 3-story buildings? Is it 5-story buildings? What is it? And what is it going to take to make this community highly livable as the region grows? That's exactly what planners do for a living. And we don't have enough of them. And it is a barrier for local communities to realize these visions.
Councilmember Zeiger, I didn't know if you had a...
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why SHAPE is so valuable, South Sound Housing Affordability Partnership, is that it really encourages regional thinking about these issues. It's easy for individual cities to say, well, we're going to do what's in our best interest. We like the way we are. We're not going to grow a lot, but this really does. It really is a regional issue, and yet I think the decisions have to be made by people at the end of the day. We're a democratic system where people need to buy into the decisions that are made about their future, and so SHAPE allows for city council members and other key decision makers in our county to come together and say, okay, here's the facts we're dealing with. Here are the growth pressures. Here's what's happening in King County. Here's what's happening in Pierce County. Here's what's happening in different cities in Pierce County. We're all in this together. We need to take responsibility and take action. And so I believe that's going to bear fruit, and it is already bearing fruit in some of the planning processes underway. But absolutely, the county can be supportive of a city, especially some of the smaller ones out there that need some additional resources in that area.
That's great. So coalescing around sort of the regional vision, right? Housing is not not a Tacoma problem, not a Lakewood problem, not a Puyallup problem, not a Bonnie Lake problem. It's a regional issue.
Right.
I appreciate that. I wanted to say that because I didn't mean to say Bonnie Lake needs more housing. I wanted to make sure to Mayor Penner, I'm not saying that. So one thing I do want to come back to Councilmember Zeiger, especially on, we talk a lot at the county level when we talk about housing. Tacoma is the biggest city, right? The most visible homelessness is most visible in Tacoma, but we know that homeless people don't only come from Tacoma, right? We've got in our point in time counts sort of the origination zip codes from members of the homeless community, and they're from everywhere around Pierce County and other places in the Puget Sound region. And so one of the things that I sort of want to make sure we talked about for a moment was when it comes to the shelter, permanent supportive housing, and affordable housing as well. Habitat's guilty of this. We don't build a bunch out in East Pierce County. We build more in Gig Harbor and KPN than we do in Puyallup and Bonnie Lake. But how do we ensure that there is sort of appropriate housing, whether that's shelter in the short term, permanent supportive housing, long-term affordable housing? How do we make sure that we are sort of equitably, placing that or building that throughout our county to serve folks, from the communities in which they are from? And I would imagine most people like living in where they're from and where their friends and family and community connections are. How do we ensure that we are doing that, or how do we work to ensure that that is done?
Well, I think that, as I said earlier, the opportunity that we've had with the planning process underway at the county that's resulted in the comprehensive plan to end homelessness, the availability of federal ARPA dollars has resulted in conversations and collaboration that we haven't seen previously. And so an example of where that's gone very well is in the city of Fife. Fife has really stepped up and said, we've got a growing homeless population within our city boundaries. We have a number of encampments, including some that are on Department of Transportation right away, and we want to do something about it. So they have a three-prong approach. They are providing housing to formerly homeless individuals on city property. They have a jobs program for people coming out of homelessness in their parks department, and they have a food and hygiene program. And it's on a small scale. They don't have a large city budget, but it's something that they can do, and they're doing it proactively. And I've used that, for example, to city of Puyallup, say, hey, look what Fife is doing. Puyallup's doing some good things too. They've got a shelter program and a hotel, and they're talking about additional measures. I will say, and in addition, I expect that it is likely there will be a hotel acquisition within Fife. And that could be an opportunity for other jurisdictions to buy in and say, we want to be part of that as well. So thinking regionally, something's going on in Fife, how can we get on board with that and support it? I think the Community First Village is another example of that. I expect that in all likelihood, that would be cited in unincorporated Pierce County. And so we have to think outside of what are the services that are going to occur in Tacoma. There's going to be more and more homeless serving institutions throughout the county.
That's great. I know SHAPE is part of this, but just those regional collaborations, breaking down the silos of communication to ensure those things happen. That's great to hear that that's going on as we address this regionally. And I want to correct myself. Mayor Penner is the mayor of Ording, not Bonnie Lake.
I thought there was an annexation going on.
Yeah. I mean, he's a Marine, maybe. Yeah. So I do want to begin to wrap up here. And so I'm going to ask two final questions. One about, but before that, I do want to ask, we talked earlier in this conversation about community members, assisting with the Community First Village or homelessness services and outreach. How do you want to see what's the best way for constituents to engage on the issues of affordable housing, attainable housing, homelessness, shelter and services, permanent support. What's the best way that you'd like to see constituents really to come to you to raise issues or ideas or thoughts for your offices to consider, right? I mean, not every idea is the best idea, but there's always going to be a kernel in every idea that, maybe provides some action for the future.
I would say most immediately take a look at that comprehensive plan to end homelessness, because that is what is sitting right before the county council right now. And I think we have an opportunity both to approve that and to maybe add to it, maybe to put forward some specific proposals of things that we want to do, whether in the short term or the long term. As we have supplemental budget money available, there will be an opportunity to potentially add to what we've set aside in the budget just recently. But I think it's so important that we get feedback in the short term from constituents on that comprehensive plan to end homelessness. I know somebody put that in the chat box earlier, and would encourage everybody to open that up if you haven't already. I'm guessing some on this call were involved at the stakeholder table in crafting that, and so you're very familiar with it. But for those who haven't, please contact us. And if you were at the table crafting that, please also contact us, because we want to hear your perspective on the process and what you see as what the next steps are.
I very much agree with that. And, one of our staff members who Heather Moss, our Director of Human Services, was very brilliant to hire. His name is Garrett Nyland, came to us from Catholic Community Services, very steeped in the real world services here with our homeless population. Garrett led the development of the plan with a lot of help. And I've had the opportunity to watch Garrett provide presentations to a number of different groups, including council. And I do want to point back to one thing specifically in the plan that Hans is mentioning, is the accountability measures. Again, I think Garrett Nyland did a really brilliant job in leading the crafting of the plan and was very intentional about these accountability measures. So that's a way that I think the general public can hold government accountable, but know that we're not in this alone. We don't have enough resources, and it's not just government's problem. It's all of it's for all of us to work on together. We certainly have responsibility, but it's going to take the private, nonprofit, philanthropic sectors to work together to tackle something of such immense challenge. So read those accountability measures as well, and figure out how folks can plug in. And I would also say Councilmember Janning Hitchen chairs our Human Services Committee of the County Council, and a lot of this work will be managed through that committee. And so that committee meets regularly and encourage citizens to engage through that policy committee of the council as well.
Thanks. Well, you just gave a bunch of homework to people still on this, and people who will watch this in the future as well. And I'm sure we'll be including a bunch of these links to these committees, the plan, as we send this recording out afterwards. So appreciate that information. So I'm going to wrap up here. One last question for you both, and this is sort of like this is the easy one, even easier than like what was the best part of the first year. So first county council budget. I know you both worked in sorry, I almost called you representative, but Councilmember Zeiger, you worked at the state level doing big budgets. Councilmember Mello, city, slightly smaller budgets, but big budget work, and now working together on the county council budget. What was the most sort of surprising thing to you? I watched a lot of your committee of the whole meetings, and it's be a slog, but I'm only interested in a small section of your budget. But a lot of information, a lot of questions with staff. What was the most surprising part of this budget process?
I don't know that I had anything too surprising. I guess I was very, very pleased to see the level of professionalism, smarts and intellect of county department staff. We have a finance department that is second to none. They're always prepared. They've done they do a great job providing us the data we need to make informed decisions. And the council staff is just top notch. And so whenever we have questions or ideas, we have the just really great staff capacity to support the council in making as informed decisions as possible. And I genuinely enjoy not only having Hans as a neighbor here in the office, but as a colleague, and incredibly approachable to bounce ideas off of each other and try to seek common ground in all the ways that we can, and just the open door policy to talk about whatever, whenever, and try to find that common ground makes life so much easier.
Thanks, Ryan. And I agree with everything you just said there. And I'd say, you know, I was pleased with the way that we did the committee of the whole process, getting to really dive deeply into each department and their priorities and needs, and to really understand the ins and outs of the budget. I felt as a first-year member of the county council, like I got all the questions answered that I needed answered, and we have just some amazing county staff. I mean, I don't think that gets out there enough as far as just what a great county staff at the department level, and certainly, as Ryan said, at our council level as well. It was a very collaborative, very bipartisan process. I would say that all 7 districts of the county were, there's an imprint of all 7 districts on that budget document. And, you can see what I would say is an equitable distribution throughout the county of the various projects that are going to be funded. We did some things for the first time, like putting money into our behavioral health fund out of that behavioral health tax. And, there'll be continued work to be done as we continue to get that online, and need a lot of input from the community as we do that. So thanks so much.
Well, thank you for sharing so much today about the budget process, about your thoughts and policy issues around housing and homelessness, and for taking an hour out of your busy day to talk with us and to talk with the community. So want to thank you both again. It's always great to talk with both of you, great to work with both of you. You're collaborative partners that I know we in the affordable housing community so deeply appreciate, both in this version of your elected lives and in your previous versions. So thank you so much for that. And once again, want to thank our sponsor, HomeStreet Bank, for bringing this cost of home conversation to everybody today. And thank you so much. That's all we got. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Ryan.
Bye.
See you both.